Because the book of Revelation has so many symbols and allegories, for centuries Bible scholars have argued over how literal our reading of the text should actually be. And that spawned different schools of philosophy or theory about how the book should be read, whether it's purely allegorical or it's partly allegorical. It should be taken literally in some places and not literally in other places. And this has been an interesting discussion that kind of came to a short stop very, very quickly around the turn of the 19th century. Because what happened was three unforeseen, unprecedented events took place in your world history, beginning first with the rise of Zionism, the idea that Jews essentially around the world said, we don't have a place where we feel we are included. But secondly, this was followed eventually by the rebirth of Israel as a nation in 1948 when the UN voted them in and basically for the first time in history declared a nation to be a nation, it being accomplished in one day as foretold by the prophet Isaiah. And then finally with the conquest and the reoccupation of the city of Jerusalem in 1967, those things foretold by Jesus in Luke 21 when he said, when you see Jerusalem is no longer trodden down by the Gentiles, you know the time of the Gentile nations has come to a close or is coming to a close. To many of these and other significant events seem to really meet the biblical requirements of the gospel. When Jesus' disciples asked him the question, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Many of us, especially of the biblicist, evangelical persuasion, began to step back and say, wow, this is indeed notable. This is unprecedented. We can't find another example in the history of the earth where something like this has taken place.
So we decided to favor a holistic approach, considering that in today's world it doesn't make any sense to have a silo approach. The reality is that the world is completely concatenated. So if just one word were to define today's world, it would be interdependence. We live in a world of systemic connectivity, meaning that the risks conflict with each other. So the main findings of the book, I think, pertain to the fact that risks create ricochet cascading effects.
So there's a lot of uncertainty, but we know already that it will have a changing effect, changing on economies, societies. The effect will be much similar to World War, and actually all countries in the world are affected.
Is that there never has been a time in human history that more closely conforms to the Bible's description of the end times than the world we're in today. You've heard me say this many times, but when we look at the big picture of things, one world government, one world economy, one world religion, there's never been an opportunity for those things to coalesce all together at one time in a very literal and real way. And that has convinced many of us to take the book of Revelation in a extremely literal reading and interpretation, and not just simply in symbolic gestures. And knowing that we may get a clear picture of what those symbols mean as those days come closer and closer. But one of the things that I would caution us is not to fall into that attitude of heart of saying, well, you know, I've lived through many dates and they haven't come, and therefore I don't even believe in end times prophecy anymore, as I've had some people tell me. In my opinion, the only thing that stands between today and the end of all things is God's timings and God's purpose. And when we talk about God's approach to time, you have to understand not only did God create time, you know, when he cast the stars and the moon, he said these were for measuring of days and weeks and months and seasons, that God says, I'm creating time. I'm creating this dynamic called time. And the reality is, he says, I can take time and I can compress it and make things happen much faster than we imagine. And I can stretch time and allow them to cover longer periods of time. And the most important thing we need to understand is we don't know which is which. It'll only take place when, as Paul said to the Thessalonians, the one who now holds back will continue to do so till he's taken out of the way. Again, a lot of discussion as to who the he is, but ultimately, whoever the he is, whether it's a person or a spirit or the Holy Spirit or it's the church, ultimately it's God himself who is in controlling of those dynamics, and until he allows those things to move forward, they will not move forward.
Sound the trumpet now. Hear the Father says, Rapture is coming. Don't get left behind. Don't get left behind. The rapture is coming. Don't get left behind. Don't get left behind.